They tell you the loneliness of the road will get you. After 20 years, I thought I was immune. I was wrong. I made one bad stop, and now I'm being hunted. It's not a person. It's a figure that moves too fast in my mirrors, a voice that whispers my name over a dead CB radio. Sleep deprivation can make you see things, I know. Maybe the man in the suit was just a trick of the moonlight. But if I'm just crazy, then why did the state trooper who tried to help me crumple to the ground without being touched? You tell me. My name is Frank. At least it was. I'm not so sure who I am anymore. I've been driving truck for 22 years. Seen every sunrise this country has to offer, from the salt spray docks of Baltimore to the fog-choked passes of the Sierra Nevadas. I know the roads. I know the rhythm. The low rumble of the Cummins engine is more my heartbeat than the one in my own chest. I've hauled it all. Produce, paper, machine parts, you name it. But this last haul, this one was different. It's why I'm talking into this little recorder in a dark cab, parked in a place I hope to God it can't find me. The call came from a new dispatcher, a voice like gravel and cheap whiskey. The job was simple on paper. Pick up a sealed reefer unit in a dusty, forgotten corner of the Nevada desert. Haul it nonstop to a nondescript warehouse in coastal Oregon. The pay was enough to make a man ignore a lot of red flags. Enough to pay off my rig, buy a little piece of land, and finally hang up my keys. The paperwork was almost non-existent. No bill of lading, no manifest, just a signature and a destination. And one rule, one single, unbreakable instruction the dispatcher repeated 3 times, his voice dropping lower and colder with each repetition. Under no circumstances do you stop the truck, Frank. Not for a tire, not for the DOT, not for an act of God. Once those wheels are turning, they don't stop turning until you hit the delivery gate. You got that. I got it. I wasn't an amateur. A nonstop run is tough, but not impossible. You fuel up beforehand, you stock the cab with coffee and beef jerky, and you become one with the machine. I figure it was something sensitive. High-tech military gear, maybe, or something so valuable that stopping made a target. The reefer unit itself was strange. No logos. Just a plain white box, sealed with heavy-duty locks I'd never seen before. The cooling unit was running when I hooked up a low, steady thrum that was somehow deeper, more resonant than a standard Thermo King. It made the fillings in my back teeth ache. But for that kind of money, I'd haul the devil's luggage. I checked my tires, filled my tanks, and pointed my Peterbilt north. For the first 6 hours, it was just another run. Just me, the green glow of the dash, and the endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing under my hood. I was running up US 95, the high desert of Nevada stretching out into an ocean of sagebrush and shadows under a cold, white moon. It's lonely country out there, the kind of place where the silence gets so loud it feels like a presence in the cab with you. The hum from the reefer was a constant companion, a low-frequency vibration that I could feel in my bones. It was unsettling. But I just turned the radio up and kept my eyes on the road. The fatal choice, the one that cracked my life open and let the horrors in, came around 2 a.m. I was about 50 miles south of Winnemucca. The world was asleep. I hadn't seen another pair of headlights for over an hour. Then I saw it. Up ahead, on the shoulder, a single flickering light. A four-wheeler, an old sedan, hood up with its hazard lights blinking weakly. Standing beside it was a woman, holding a small flashlight, waving it frantically in my direction. My foot instinctively eased off the accelerator. Every instinct, every code I lived by for 2 decades on the road, screamed at me. You don't leave someone stranded out here. Not in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. That's a potential death sentence. But the dispatcher's voice was right there in my ear. Under no circumstances do you stop. I wrestled with it. My mind raced, trying to justify leaving her there. Maybe it's a setup, a hijack crew, but it was a woman alone. She looked thin, desperate. What if her kid was in the car? My hand hovered over the CB mic to call in, but my radio had been spitting static for the last hour. No signal. It was on me. Just me. I slowed the rig down, the Jake brake roaring to life, tearing a hole in the desert silence. I can't just leave her, I told myself. I'll keep the engine running, lock the doors, and call the highway patrol from my cell the second I get a signal. A quick wellness check. 30 seconds, tops. That's all. I eased the 18-wheeler onto the shoulder, the truck groaning in protest. The air brakes hissed, a sound like the world exhaling. For the first time in over 300 miles, my wheels stopped turning. I killed the radio, plunging the cab into an unnerving quiet. And in that quiet, something changed. The deep, bone-rattling hum from the reefer behind me. It cut out. Abruptly. The sudden absence of the sound was more shocking than a gunshot. The silence that followed was absolute, primal. It was the sound of a predator holding its breath. Then I heard it, a sound from inside the sealed, locked trailer. It wasn't the sound of shifting cargo. It was a low, deliberate thump, 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 like something heavy, something that had been lying down, was now slowly, deliberately getting to its feet. The woman on the side of the road wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at my trailer, her face a mask of pure terror. That was the choice that sealed my fate. The choice that turned a 48-hour run into an eternity in hell. That's when I understood the rule wasn't to protect the cargo. It was to protect everyone else from the cargo. My blood went cold. It wasn't just cold. It felt like it had turned to ice water and ammonia, a chemical freeze that started in my gut and shot up my spine into the base of my skull. The silence from the reefer unit was a gaping wound in the night, and that rhythmic, heavy thumping from inside the trailer was the sound of salt being poured into it. Thump, thump, thump. It was patient, measured. I'd hauled swinging meat. I'd hauled poorly secured pallets of engine blocks. I knew the sounds of shifting cargo. This wasn't that. This was the sound of something coming to life. My eyes were locked on the woman. Her flashlight beam trembled, dancing across the side of my trailer. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. She wasn't a stranded motorist in distress. She was a sentry, a warning, or maybe bait. My mind, which just moments before had been calculating fuel consumption and arrival times, was now a frantic scramble of pure, primal panic. I needed to get moving. Now, the dispatcher's words, which I had treated as a procedural inconvenience, were now a holy commandment I had just blasphemed. Under no circumstances do you stop. My hand flew to the gear shift. I slammed it into first, my knuckles white. My foot stomped on the accelerator, but instead of the roar of 700 horsepower, I got a pathetic, wheezing cough. The engine sputtered, tried to catch, and then died. A chorus of angry red lights lit up my dash like a hellish Christmas tree. Engine fault. Critical failure. Check engine. The silence was now absolute. No engine hum. No reefer hum. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart against my ribs. And the thumping from the back. It was faster now. More insistent. Thump, 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 thump. No, 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 no. I whispered, turning the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. It was as if every wire connecting the battery to the starter had been vaporized in an instant. This wasn't a mechanical failure. A truck like this, a meticulously maintained Peterbilt, doesn't just die without warning. It gives you signs, a stutter, a loss of power, a strange smell. This was like someone had flipped a switch, the kill switch, and it happened the exact second I stopped. I looked back at the woman on the shoulder. She was backing away slowly, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. But it wasn't fear for me. It was fear of what I had brought with me, what I just unleashed. She dropped her flashlight, turned, and scrambled into her car. The engine of the old sedan fired up instantly, a perfect, healthy roar that mocked my rig's sudden death. She didn't even turn on her headlights. She just slammed the car into gear and peeled out, spraying gravel against my passenger door as she sped away into the darkness, leaving me alone. Completely and utterly alone with my dead truck and the thing that was now awake in my trailer. For a moment, I tried to rationalize it. It had to be a prank. A ridiculously elaborate, high-stakes prank. The woman, the broken-down car, it was all a diversion. Someone, maybe a rival company, had attached a remote kill switch to my engine's ECM. They were trying to hijack the load. The thumping? Just part of the show. Maybe some kind of hydraulic ram inside the trailer they could trigger remotely to scare the driver into abandoning the rig. It was a good story, a logical one. It explained everything. The weird dispatcher, the secrecy, the no-stop rule. It was all about protecting a high-value shipment from sophisticated thieves. The woman wasn't a victim. She was a scout for the hijackers, and when she saw I wasn't running, her job was done. Clinging to this thought, this thin, flimsy shield of logic, I grabbed my mag light from the door pocket. My hands were shaking, but I forced them steady. I was going to get out, do the walk around, find the device they planted on my engine. I'd rip it out, get the truck started, and be gone before they made their move. I wasn't some greenhorn they could spook. I was Frank Carver, and this was my rig. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The moment my foot hit the top step of the cab, the thumping stopped. Absolute silence returned. But it was worse this time. The silence was expectant, waiting. Then, from the trailer, a new sound. A long, low, metallic screech. It was the sound of thick steel groaning under immense, unnatural pressure. It was the sound of the locks. The heavy-duty, state-of-the-art locks on the reefer doors. One of them, then another, began to shriek as the metal pins inside were slowly, impossibly, being bent outwards from the inside. That sound, that high-pitched metallic scream of tortured steel, cut through my neat little theory about hijackers and remote kill switches like a hot knife. Hydraulic rams don't bend hardened steel locks from the inside. Pranksters don't have the tools for that. Not on the fly, not in the middle of the desert. The logic I had clung to evaporated into the cold night air, leaving me naked and exposed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the horrifying symphony of groaning metal. I was frozen on the top step of my cab, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, a perfect picture of a man caught between two worlds. The one I knew of diesel and asphalt, and a new one, a world of impossible things happening right behind me. I scrambled back inside, slamming the heavy door shut. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I fumbled for the lock, my trembling fingers barely able to find the plunger. I jammed it down. Then I did something I hadn't done in 20 years of driving. I flicked the deadbolt, a feature I'd always considered a useless bit of chrome. The screeching from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. It was joined by a second, deeper sound, a grinding noise, the sound of the thick, insulated reefer doors themselves beginning to buckle, to warp under a force that shouldn't exist. My mind was a slideshow of pure, unadulterated fear. What was in there? What kind of cargo requires a non-stop journey not for its own preservation, but to keep it dormant? The low, constant hum of the reefer unit, it wasn't cooling the cargo. It was lulling it. A mechanical lullaby. The vibration, the movement, the constant drone. It was a cage of sensory input. And I had just turned it off. I had stopped the lullaby. I had let the monster wake up. I grabbed my phone from its cradle on the dash. No service. The little icon was a mocking void. I snatched the CB mic, breaker 19. Anybody got a copy on a northbound Pete on US 95? I need a smoky now. I got a 10 to 20, my rig is disabled. And I have an emergency situation. I shouted into the handset, my voice cracking. Static. Nothing but the hiss of empty airwaves. It was dead. Completely dead. I clicked the transmit button again and again. Nothing. It wasn't just a lack of signal. The unit itself was fried. No lights, no channel display. Just like the engine, it was as if an invisible hand had reached into my truck's electrical system and snuffed it out. The screeching from the back intensified to a fever pitch, a sound that set my teeth on edge and made my whole body vibrate. Then came a deafening bang, like a cannon shot. The entire rig shook violently, throwing me against the steering wheel. I looked at my passenger side mirror, my eyes wide with disbelief. One of the heavy steel lock bars on the top, right of the trailer door, was gone. Not unlocked. Not broken. It was sheared clean off, the jagged stump of metal glinting in the pale moonlight. The door itself was now visibly bowed outwards, a dark gap appearing along the top edge. This was it, the point of no return. My truck was dead. My communications were gone. And whatever was in my trailer was seconds away from tearing its way out. The thought of hijackers was a distant, almost comforting memory. This was something else entirely. This was ancient, primal. I wasn't being robbed. I was being hunted. The trailer wasn't a vault. It was a cage. and I had just opened the door. My survival instinct, that deep animal part of the brain that lies dormant until you're staring death in the face, took over. I couldn't drive. I couldn't call for help. The only thing left was to run. I scanned the cab, my eyes falling on the tire iron I kept wedged beside the passenger seat. It wasn't much, but it was heavy, solid steel. I grabbed it, the cold metal a small, inadequate comfort in my sweaty palm. I looked out my driver's side window into the endless, empty desert. There was nowhere to go. No lights, no buildings, nothing but sagebrush and shadows for 100 miles in every direction. Running seemed just as much a death sentence as staying. Another thunderous bang rocked the truck, this one even more violent than the last. The bottom lock bar snapped, its shriek of protest swallowed by the impact. The right side trailer door was now hanging precariously by its hinges, a wide, black maw opening into the trailer's interior. I couldn't see what was inside. It was a pocket of absolute darkness, an unnatural void that seemed to drink the moonlight. But I could feel it, a presence, a pressure building in the air, a feeling of immense, ancient patience that had finally run out. My choice was made. Staying was death. Running was a chance. A slim, terrifying chance. I took one last look around the cab. My home, my kingdom, now in a tomb, and I braced myself to open the door and flee into the unforgiving night. But just as my hand reached for the handle, a new sound came from the gaping darkness of the trailer. It wasn't a thump or a screech or a bang. It was a voice, a low, guttural whisper that wasn't carried on the air but seemed to manifest directly inside my skull. It spoke a single, impossible word. It spoke my name, Frank. The word echoed, not in the cab, but in the deepest parts of my mind. Frank. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of ownership. It was the sound of a shepherd calling a lost sheep. Except this shepherd didn't have a crook and a gentle smile. It had the power to shear through solid steel. My hand recoiled from the door handle as if it were red hot. Running was no longer an option. How do you run from something that's already inside your head? How do you hide from something that knows your name? Every hair on my body stood on end. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead, dripping into my eyes. This wasn't a random monster, a mindless beast clawing its way out of a box. This was intelligent. It had disabled my truck, my communications. It had used the woman as a lure, a piece on a chessboard I didn't even know I was playing on. It had waited patiently for the precise moment of my failure, the moment I broke the one rule I was given. And now it was talking to me. The rules of my world, of physics, of logic, of cause and effect, had been systematically dismantled. I was in its world now, and it was teaching me the new rules. Rule 1, it is not contained. The trailer was not a prison. It was a waiting room. Rule 2, it is not mindless. It is a thinking, calculating predator. Rule 3, it knows you. Personally. A third, final, cataclysmic bang shook the entire rig. The hinges on the right side door gave way with a final, pathetic groan, and the heavy, insulated door crashed onto the asphalt shoulder with a sound that echoed across the desert plain. The black void in the back of my trailer was now wide open to the night. I stared into my side view mirror, my knuckles white on the tire iron, expecting, I don't know what, a hulking beast, a tangle of limbs, a creature from some forgotten Lovecraftian nightmare. But I saw nothing. The trailer appeared to be empty. A cavern of perfect, silent, featureless black. The silence stretched for a terrifying eternity. The whispering in my head had stopped. The only sound was my own breathing, shallow and ragged. My eyes, straining, scanned every inch of the mirror, looking for any hint of movement, any shape coalescing in the darkness. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched was immense. It was a physical weight pressing in on the cab, making the air thick and hard to breathe. It was coming from the trailer, I knew it, but it was also everywhere. It was in the shadows dancing between the sagebrush. It was in the cold, indifferent glitter of the stars. It was as if the desert itself had opened an eye and was staring right at me. Then the street lights began to go out. The sodium lamps lining this lonely stretch of US 95 marching off into the distance in both directions, began to extinguish. Not randomly, not flickering like a bad bulb. One by one, pop, a pool of light vanished. 5 seconds later, pop, the next one down the line winked out. It was a countdown, a systematic extinguishing of the modern world, pushing the darkness closer and closer to my truck. North and south, the lights went out in perfect, horrifying synchronicity, the wave of blackness rushing towards me from both horizons. It was impossible. It was a display of power, a demonstration. It was showing me the scale of its cage. This wasn't just about my truck. It was about this entire stretch of road. I was paralyzed, watching the tide of darkness roll in. My little island of safety, the cab of my Peterbilt, was about to be swallowed. When the last two lights, the ones immediately in front of and behind my rig, finally popped and died, plunging me into a profound, primordial blackness broken only by the pale silver of the moon, the whispering started again. It wasn't just my name this time. It was a soft, sibilant stream of words, slithering directly into my consciousness. The road is long, Frank, but it ends now. The delivery is here. You're the delivery. My sanity frayed. This couldn't be real. I was having a stroke. I was asleep at the wheel, dreaming this all up in the final microsecond before my truck drifted off the road and rolled into a ravine. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, I'd be pulling into the truck stop in Winnemucca, the smell of stale coffee and bacon filling the air. I counted to 5, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I opened my eyes. The darkness was still there. The dead truck, the broken trailer, and something new. In the side view mirror, reflecting the faint moonlight, a shape was finally beginning to resolve in the black maw of the trailer. It wasn't a beast. It was a man. A tall, impossibly thin man in a worn, dark suit, stepping out of the absolute darkness as if he were stepping out of a doorway. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly inhuman, and his face. I couldn't see his face. It was a blur, a smear of shadow that the moonlight refused to touch. He stood beside my trailer, perfectly still, and slowly, he raised one long, pale hand and beckoned to me. Seeing that figure, that impossible man in the dark suit, broke the spell of my paralysis. The sight was so fundamentally wrong, so alien, that it jolted my survival instinct back online. The voice in my head, the dying lights, the sheared steel, that was abstract terror. This was concrete, a physical manifestation of the nightmare, standing right there on the asphalt. And it wanted me. That silent, beckoning gesture was not an invitation. It was a summons. I didn't think. I acted. I threw open the driver's side door, jumped the 3 feet to the ground, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran, clutching the tire iron like a holy relic, my worn work boots pounding against the cracked pavement of the dead highway. The desert air was thin and cold, burning my lungs with every ragged gasp. My world shrank to the circle of ground illuminated by my stumbling feet and the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I ran north, in the direction of Winnemucca, 50 miles of empty, hostile blackness. It was a fool's errand, a desperate, hopeless flight, but it was better than staying. It was better than answering that summons. I ran until my lungs were screaming for mercy and my legs felt like lead. Every few seconds, I'd risk a glance over my shoulder. The truck was a dark shape shrinking behind me, a tomb I had just escaped. I couldn't see the figure of the man anymore, but that brought me no comfort. I had the distinct, chilling sensation that I wasn't outrunning it, that it was letting me run, that this was part of the game, a new, more entertaining phase of the hunt. After what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 minutes of full-out sprinting, a pinprick of light appeared on the horizon ahead of me. Headlights, coming my way. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. A car, a truck, another human being, someone who could help me, someone who could prove I wasn't insane, that this was real. I moved to the center of the northbound lane, waving my arms frantically. The tire iron was still in my hand, and I realized how I must look, a madman in the middle of the highway. I tossed it into the sagebrush, not wanting to scare them off. The headlights grew steadily brighter, resolving into the high, square shape of a big rig. A fellow trucker. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. He'd understand. He'd have a working CB. He'd know the code of the road. He wouldn't leave me out here. As the truck got closer, I could make out the distinctive shape of a Freightliner Cascadia, its grille a chrome grin in the moonlight. He slowed as he approached, his air brakes hissing, bathing me in the warm, life-affirming glow of his headlights. He pulled to a stop about 20 feet away, the rumble of his diesel engine, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The driver's side window rolled down with an electric hum. A man's face, etched with the familiar lines of a life spent on the road, peered down at me from the high cab. He was middle-aged, with a thick mustache and a tired, weary look in his eyes. "You all right there, driver?" he called out, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Bit of a strange place for a stroll. "My truck's dead," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Back there, maybe 2 miles south." "Oh, Pete, everything just died on me. My phone, my CB, everything. Something's wrong. Terribly wrong." The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He looked past me, down the dark road in the direction I'd come from. "Dead, you say? That's a bitch. See it happen. Modern electronics. One bad sensor, and you're a sitting duck." "No, it's not that," I said, stepping closer to his door, desperate to make him understand. "There's something else. My cargo, there was something in my trailer. A man. He got out. He killed my truck. He killed the damn streetlights." I knew how I sounded. Crazy. Unhinged. I could see the flicker of doubt, of pity, in his eyes. He sighed a long, weary sound. "Look, pal, the desert plays tricks on you at night. Sleep deprivation's a killer. Why don't you hop in? I'll give you a lift into Winnemucca. We could call a tow for you from there." Relief and gratitude warred with the frantic need to make him believe me. But a ride was a ride. A ride was safety. "God, thank you," I said, my legs weak with relief. "Thank you." I walked around to the passenger's side, my boots crunching on the loose gravel of the shoulder. He leaned over and pushed the door open for me from the inside. I climbed the steps, my exhausted body screaming in protest, and pulled myself into the clean, warm cab. It smelled of pine air freshener and stale coffee. It smelled like salvation. "Name's Earl," the driver said, holding out a calloused hand as I shut the door. "Frank," I said, shaking it. "Well, Frank," he said, putting the truck in gear. "Let's get you out of the cold." He glanced at his CB radio mounted on the dash. Unlike mine, it was alive, glowing with a soft green light. He picked up the mic. "You said your radio was out?" "Yeah, fried. Just like the engine," I replied, sinking into the passenger's seat. He nodded again, that same slow, thoughtful motion. Then he keyed the mic. His voice, when he spoke, was different, colder, devoid of the weary camaraderie it held just a moment before. "This is Watchtower," he said into the handset. "I have the asset. He is contained. I repeat, the asset is contained." He paused, listening to a burst of static that I couldn't decipher. Then he looked at me, his eyes no longer tired or wary, but sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of mercy. He knows. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The friendly, road-weary trucker named Earl vanished, replaced by this Watchtower. His face, which had seemed open and sympathetic, was now a cold, professional mask. The warmth in the cab evaporated, replaced by an Arctic chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The pine air freshener scent was suddenly cloying, a cheap cover for the smell of a trap. I had run from a spider only to climb gratefully into the web. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit of ice. The asset is contained. I wasn't a survivor being rescued. I was a package being picked up. My mind reeled, frantically trying to process the betrayal. He wasn't a random trucker. He was part of it. The woman on the shoulder, the thing in the trailer, and now him. This wasn't a lone monster. It was an organization. A coordinated, patient, and terrifyingly efficient one. They had known I would run. They had known I would run north. And they had sent him to intercept me. My desperate flight down the highway hadn't been an escape. It had been just another predetermined move in their game. What is this?" I stammer, my voice barely a whisper. My hand instinctively went to the door handle. He saw the movement. "Don't," he said, his voice flat and calm. It was the calmness that terrified me. It was the voice of a man completely in control of the situation. "The doors are locked. The windows are reinforced. Just sit back, Frank. It's better if you don't struggle." He put the CB mic back in its holder and placed both hands on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The Freightliner picked up speed, its engine a deep, menacing growl. We were driving north, but we weren't going to Winnemucca. I knew that with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. We were going to the delivery point. My delivery point. "Who are you people?" I demanded, trying to inject some strength into my voice. "What was in that trailer?" He was silent for a long moment, the green glow of the dash illuminating the hard lines of his face. "You're a good driver, Frank," he said, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Professional. Meticulous. We chose you for a reason. You were never supposed to stop. You were just supposed to drive. Deliver the vessel, collect your money, and go home. Simple. The vessel." I choked out the word. "That thing?" The man in the suit. He glanced at me, a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, in his cold eyes. "You saw him? Huh. He must be getting impatient. Or maybe he likes you." The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. "The vessel, Frank, is just that. A container. What's inside? Let's just call him the passenger. And the passenger doesn't like to be kept waiting. The motion of the truck, the vibration, the drone of the reefer, it keeps him placid, grounded in this reality. When you stop, the connection wavers. He can exert more influence, break things, talk to people. And the woman? The breakdown? A contingency," Earl, or whatever his name was, replied smoothly. "A test, to see if you'd follow the primary rule. You failed, and when you failed, my job began." My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. The tire iron was gone. The doors were locked. I was in a moving steel box with one of my captors. He was bigger than me, stronger. A physical fight was suicide. I looked around the cab, my eyes darting from the dash to the floor, searching for a weapon, a tool, anything. My gaze fell on the gear shift, a tall metal stick with a heavy knob. Maybe, if I could distract him. I decided to keep him talking. "So what now? Where are you taking me?" "The original destination," he said. "The warehouse in Oregon. It was never about the cargo in the trailer, Frank. It was about you. The passenger needs a new vessel from time to time. A new driver. One who knows the roads. One who can handle the rig. He gets lonely." The implications of his words crashed down on me. They weren't going to kill me. It was so much worse than that. I was the replacement part. I was meant to become the next container for that passenger. My body, my mind, fused with that entity, forced to drive these haunted roads for eternity. That was the real cargo. Me. A cold, hard resolve formed in the pit of my stomach, displacing the fear. It was the same primal instinct that had made me run, but now it was focused, sharp. I would not let that happen. I would die before I let that thing inside my head. I would crash this truck, I would fight him until he killed me, but I would not be a vessel. I leaned forward slightly, feigning despair. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "It's too late for that, Frank. The passenger has already made his choice." That was my cue. As he spoke, I launched myself across the cab. I didn't go for his throat. I didn't go for the wheel. I grabbed the CB mic, yanked it hard from its coiled cord, and with all my strength, I smashed the heavy plastic handset into the truck's dashboard, right into the main instrument cluster. The plastic shattered. Sparks flew. Warning lights and alarms blared to life. A cacophony of electronic shrieking. The engine sputtered as the truck's electronic control module, its brain, shorted out. The Freightliner lurched violently, its speed dropping rapidly. Earl roared in anger, backhanding me across the face, the blow stunning me, sending me tumbling back into the passenger seat. But the damage was done. The truck coasted to a halt, its engine dead, its lights flickering and dying, plunging us into the same profound darkness that had swallowed my own rig. We were dead in the water, just like before, and I knew, with a fresh surge of terror, what happened when the motion stopped. Earl knew it too. His face was a mask of pure panic. He looked out his window, back down the dark road we'd come. "You have no idea what you've just done," he whispered, his voice trembling. The confident, professional captor was gone, replaced by a man staring his own damnation in the face. From the south, from the direction of my abandoned trailer, a single point of light appeared on the road. But it wasn't headlights. It was the pale, ghostly figure of the man in the dark suit, and he was walking towards us. And this time, he was not moving slowly. He was coming at a dead run. The sight of that figure running, not walking, but running with an unnatural, fluid speed that ate up the asphalt, shattered what was left of Earl's composure. The professional hunter was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd just seen the devil punch his time card. Panic radiated off him in waves. He fumbled with the key, turning it uselessly in the dead ignition, muttering a stream of curses under his breath. The blaring alarms from my attack on the dash had died, leaving us in a silence that was thick with dread, broken only by our own ragged breathing. "He's not supposed to be able to do that," Earl whispered, his eyes wide, glued to the approaching figure in his side view mirror. "He shouldn't be this strong outside the vessel." Stopping was never part of the protocol. Never. His panic was my opportunity. The primal fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but seeing my captor just as terrified, if not more so, gave me a sliver of an edge. I wasn't a helpless asset anymore. I was a saboteur. I had thrown a wrench in their perfect, sterile plan. While his attention was fixed on the approaching nightmare, I acted. My hand shot out and grabbed the handle for the air horn, a thick, braided cord that hung from the ceiling. I yanked it down with all my might. Instead of the deafening blast I'd hoped for, I got a pathetic, wheezing gasp. The truck's air pressure was bleeding out, but it was enough. The unexpected noise, sharp and sudden in the silent cab, made Earl flinch. In that split second of distraction, I lunged again, this time for the door lock on his side. My fingers found the plunger. I slammed it up. "Get out!" I roared, my voice raw. He didn't need telling twice. He threw his door open and practically fell out of the cab, scrambling to his feet on the shoulder. He took off into the desert, running perpendicular to the road, away from the approaching figure, a frantic, clumsy flight into the sagebrush. He didn't look back. He just ran, abandoning his truck, his mission me. He was just another cog in the machine, and the machine had broken. I slid over into the driver's seat, my mind racing. I was free of my captor, but I was in the exact same situation as before, trapped in a dead truck while a paranormal entity sprinted towards me. But this time was different. I had a piece of information I didn't have before. The passenger, the man in the suit, was weaker when he was moving. He needed a vessel, a driver, to contain him, to ground him. My stopping was a mistake, but Earl's stopping was a catastrophe for them. I had to get this truck moving. I turned the key. Nothing. Still dead. I scanned the wrecked dash, the shattered instrument panel. My desperate attack had been effective, but now it was my own undoing. I wasn't a mechanic. I couldn't fix a fried ECM on the side of the highway. I looked in the mirror. The figure was closer now, maybe a quarter-mile away. I could see the details of his suit, flapping in the wind of his unnatural speed. His face was still a featureless blur of shadow. My eyes darted around the cab, searching for another answer. Then I saw it, a flare gun, tucked into a holster mounted on the back wall of the cab behind the driver's seat. A standard piece of emergency equipment. A flare gun, a plan, insane and desperate, began to form in my mind. The figure was getting stronger because the truck was stopped. What if I could create the illusion of movement? The illusion of a disaster? I grabbed the flare gun, my hands slick with sweat. It was heavy, solid plastic. I broke it open, my fingers fumbling with the fat, waxy cartridge inside. Red flare. Emergency. Perfect. I looked out the windshield. We were on a slight downward grade. The road sloped gently downhill for at least a mile. If I could get the truck rolling, I slammed the flare gun down on the passenger seat, reached down, and pulled the bright yellow knob for the parking brake. The truck groaned a deep, metallic sigh, and with a lurch, it began to roll. Slowly at first, then picking up speed as gravity took hold. It was working. The dead Freightliner was rolling silently down the dark highway, a ghost ship on a sea of asphalt. I looked in the mirror again. The running figure had stopped. He stood in the middle of the road, a dark silhouette against the moonlight, seemingly confused by this new development. The truck was moving, but there was no engine noise. The lullaby hadn't started, but something had changed. I had altered the state of the game. I watched him, my heart in my throat, as my silent, rolling truck created more and more distance between us. For a moment, I thought it had worked. I thought he was stumped. Then, he raised his head, and the whispering returned to my mind, louder and more venomous than before. Clever boy, clever meat, but the game is not over. The board is bigger than you think. And then, far ahead of me, at the bottom of the long, gentle slope, a single light flickered on. And another. A small town. A cluster of buildings around the highway that hadn't been on my map. A beacon of light in the darkness. A sanctuary. As my ghost truck rolled silently towards it, the streetlights of the town began to glow, welcoming me in. But I felt no relief. I felt a cold, sinking dread. The man in the suit was no longer chasing me. He was letting me go. He was letting me roll right into the heart of his trap. This town wasn't a refuge. It was the center of the web. It was the delivery destination. The ghost ride down the grade felt like a descent into hell's foyer. Every foot the truck rolled silently forward. The welcoming lights of the town grew brighter, and the knot of dread in my stomach tightened. The town shouldn't be there. I knew this stretch of 95. I knew the maps. Between Winnemucca and the Oregon border, there was nothing. A few dirt roads, a forgotten ranch, or two, but no town. Not one with streetlights and what looked like a dozen buildings. It was a mirage, a phantom town conjured out of the desert night, and I was rolling right into its open arms. The whispers in my head had stopped again, but the silence was worse. It was the silence of a predator that has cornered its prey and is now simply enjoying the view. I knew, with sickening certainty, that Earl hadn't been taking me to a warehouse in Oregon. He was taking me here. This was the place, the true destination. The truck slowed as the grade leveled out, finally coasting to a stop just inside the town's imaginary city limits, right under the buzz of a flickering sodium lamp. I was exhausted. My body ached from the sprint, the fight, the sheer, unrelenting terror. My mind was a frayed wire, sparking with paranoia and sleep-deprived hallucinations. Was any of this real? Was I dying in the cab of my own truck 2 miles back, my brain playing out this elaborate final movie? The thought was a tempting escape, but the cold plastic of the flare gun in my hand, the sharp smell of ozone from the fry dashboard, it was all too real. I peered through the dusty windshield. The town was called Havenwood. A hand-painted wooden sign hung crookedly from a post, the letters faded and peeling. It was a picture of small-town America, something out of a forgotten postcard. A main street with a diner, a gas station, a small motel with a blinking neon sign that read vacancy. But it was all wrong. The silence was too profound. There were no cars parked along the street. No people visible through the large plate glass window of the diner. The lights were on, but nobody was home. It was a stage, beautifully set, waiting for the final act to begin. My adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, soul-crushing weariness. My resources were dwindling. I had no food, no water. My only weapon was a single flare. I was out of plans, out of energy. My flight from the man in the suit had led me here. My desperate gamble to get the truck moving had only accelerated my delivery. Every choice I made, every clever move I thought I was pulling, just pushed me further down their predetermined path. My exhaustion was making me sloppy. My desperation was making me predictable. I needed a rest, to think, just for a minute. The motel sign blinked its tempting, rhythmic promise of safety. A bed, a locked door, a moment to breathe. I knew it was a trap. Of course, it was a trap. The whole town was a trap. But my body was shutting down. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached to them. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a room, barricade the door, and get an hour of sleep. Just 1 hour. A small rest to gather my strength before whatever came next. It was a stupid, irrational thought born of pure physical and mental exhaustion. It was a critical mistake. Clutching the flare gun, I eased the truck door open. The air outside was still and cold. The buzz of the streetlights was the only sound. I slipped out of the cab and crept across the empty street, my boots making no sound on the pristine asphalt. The motel office door was unlocked. I pushed it open. A small bell tinkled musically above my head. The lobby was empty, coated in a fine layer of dust. Yet the lights were on, and a small television behind the counter was playing a black and white movie to an audience of no one. A key was sitting on the counter, attached to a plastic fob with a number 7 on it. Beside it was a guest ledger, open to a fresh page. There was only one entry, written in a pristine, elegant script that I recognized with a jolt of ice-cold horror. It was my name, Frank Carver, and next to it, in the date of arrival column, was yesterday's date. They had been expecting me. My breath hitched. I backed out of the office slowly, my eyes scanning the silent street. This wasn't just a trap. It was a cage built specifically for me. My exhaustion had led me right to the baited hook. I had to get out, get back to the truck, get away from this place. But as I turned, a sound broke the silence. The low, familiar rumble of a diesel engine. It was coming from the far end of town, from the direction I'd come. Headlights cut through the darkness. It was my truck, my Peterbilt. It rolled slowly down the main street, its engine running smoothly, its lights cutting through the gloom. It pulled into the parking lot of the motel and stopped. The driver's side door opened. The man in the dark suit stepped out. He moved with that same eerie grace, his face still a vortex of shadow. He didn't look at me. He looked at the motel, at the blinking vacancy sign, then at the key for room 7 that I had just seen on the counter. Then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He reached up, pulled a set of keys from his pocket, and remotely locked my Peterbilt. The horn chirped once, a friendly, final sound. He had taken my truck, my home, my last shred of hope. He turned his blurred, featureless face towards me, and the voice slithered back into my skull, no longer a whisper, but a calm, conversational thought. The vessel is prepared. Your room is ready. It is time to check in, Frank. He took a single, deliberate step towards me. My exhaustion vanished, replaced by the white-hot terror of a cornered animal. My ride was gone. The town was the cage, and the zookeeper was coming to collect me. This was it, the bottom, the end of the line. Everything had been stripped away. My rig, my one piece of sovereign territory in the world, was now his. The illusion of escape, the idea that I had any control, was annihilated by the casual chirp of my own truck's locks. I was on foot in a phantom town that was the heart of the enemy's territory, and the enemy itself was walking towards me. There was no more running, no more clever tricks. The board was cleared, and it was just me and him. My back was literally against the wall of the motel office. The cold stucco pressed against my spine. I raised a flare gun, my hand trembling so violently I was surprised I could hold it. It felt like a child's toy against the immense, ancient presence of the thing approaching me. The man in the suit, the passenger, didn't slow down. He just kept coming, his steps silent on the pavement, each one a nail in my coffin. "Stay back," I croaked, my voice a pathetic, reedy thing. "I swear to God, I'll use this." The voice in my head was calm, almost pitying. "That is a tool for signaling for help, Frank. There is no one to signal. There is no help. There is only the delivery. You were paid to make it. Now it is time to be it." He was 20 feet away. The featureless void of his face seemed to draw in the light around it. I could feel the pressure of his presence, a psychic weight that made my knees weak and my thoughts swim. This was how it ended. He would touch me, and that would be it. I would become a passenger in my own body, another ghost haunting the lonely highways, my consciousness trapped, screaming behind the eyes of a silent driver. My finger tightened on the trigger of the flare gun. It was a bluff, and we both knew it. A flare wouldn't stop him. It might not even pass through him, but it was all I had left. My last act of defiance before the end. He was 10 feet away. I could smell him now. A scent like ozone and cold, damp earth, like a freshly dug grave. The world narrowed to the space between us. The buzzing motel sign, the silent diner, the vast desert beyond, it all faded away. There was only the predator and the prey. My desperation curdled into a strange, fatalistic calm. I was going to die, or worse, but I would not go quietly. I would not be delivered. I would go down fighting, even if the fight was pointless. I aimed a flare gun squarely at the center of his chest, at the crisp white shirt I could now see under his dark suit jacket. Just as my thumb pulled back the hammer, a sound cut through the night. A wail. A high-pitched, desperate siren. It came from the south, from the highway I'd come down. Red and blue lights flashed against the buildings of Havenwood, painting the silent street in frantic, strobing colors. A highway patrol car was tearing into town, its siren screaming, its tires squealing as it fishtailed to a halt between me and the passenger. Hope, a feeling I thought had been permanently extinguished, exploded in my chest. It was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. A cop. A real cop. The law. He was here. He must have seen the dead truck, or maybe Earl, the watchtower, had been caught. It didn't matter. He was here. The driver's side door of the patrol car flew open. A state trooper, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped out, his hand on the butt of his holstered pistol. He used the door as a shield, his face grim and professional in the flashing lights. "Step away from the civilian," the trooper yelled, his voice a commanding bark that cut through the oppressive silence. His voice was real, not a whisper in my skull. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. The man in the suit stopped. He turned his head slowly, the featureless blur of his face now directed at the cop. He showed no fear, no surprise, only a kind of weary annoyance, like a man swatting at a fly. "This doesn't concern you, officer," the voice echoed in my head, but the trooper seemed to hear it too. He flinched, his eyes widening slightly. "On the ground now. Hands behind your head," the trooper commanded, his voice tight with tension. He drew his weapon, the click of the safety echoing in the night. I didn't wait. This was my chance. My only chance. While the trooper had him distracted, I turned and bolted. I ran alongside the motel, into the darkness of the alleyway between it and the diner. I glanced back for a fraction of a second, and what I saw will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The trooper was aiming his gun, shouting commands. The man in the suit simply raised one long, pale hand. The patrol car's headlights exploded in a shower of sparks. The siren died with a strangled groan. The flashing lights went out. The trooper crumpled to the ground as if his strings had been cut, his body convulsing once before lying still. The passenger hadn't even touched him. I was at the bottom. I thought I had been there before, but I was wrong. This was the true bottom. The cavalry wasn't coming. The cavalry was dead. I was trapped in a town-sized cage, and the keeper had just effortlessly swatted away the only help I had. I was completely, utterly, and irreversibly defeated. I stumbled to a halt behind the diner, my back against the dumpster, and slid to the ground, the flare gun falling from my nerveless fingers. I could hear his silent footsteps approaching, and I just closed my eyes, waiting for the end. I sat there in the filth and grime behind the diner, a dead man waiting for his appointment. The last ember of hope had been snuffed out with the life of that trooper. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own ragged, defeated breaths. I could hear his footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel of the alleyway. He wasn't rushing. He had won. He was just walking over to claim his prize. I squeezed my eyes shut, a meaningless gesture of final surrender. My life played out in a series of frantic, disjointed images. The sun rising over the Rockies, the smell of my wife's coffee, the first time I turned the key in my very own rig. It was all over. And then, amidst the slideshow of my dying memories, one image stuck. It was small, insignificant, something I hadn't even consciously registered at the time. The dispatcher. The voice on the phone, like gravel and cheap whiskey. As he'd repeated the primary rule for the third time. Under no circumstances do you stop. There had been another sound in the background of the call. A faint, rhythmic noise. A click, 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 like a slow, steady metronome. At the time, I dismissed it as office noise, a broken fan, anything. But now, in this moment of absolute despair, my mind replayed it with perfect clarity. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a cooling engine block. The distinctive ticking sound a big rig makes after a long, hard run when it's finally shut down. And another detail surfaced slotting into place right beside it. The bill of lading. There wasn't one. The job was completely off the books. Except for my signature. I had signed a single piece of paper in that dusty Nevada depot. A waiver? A receipt? I had barely glanced at it. But I remembered the letterhead. It wasn't a trucking company. It was a single, stylized word. Janus. Janus. The Roman god. The god of beginnings and endings, of doorways and transitions. The god with two faces, one looking forward, one looking back. My mind, free from the burden of hope, free from the panic of escape, was suddenly, strangely clear. This wasn't a supernatural haunting. It wasn't a government conspiracy in the traditional sense. This was a business. A horrifying, esoteric, but ultimately transactional business. The dispatcher, the man on the phone, he wasn't just some middleman. That clicking in the background, he was a driver. He was a former vessel. He had completed his service. He had found his replacement. Me. The passenger, this ancient entity, was the core of their business. But the vessels, the drivers, they weren't permanent. They were contractors. The voice in my head had said, the passenger needs a new vessel from time to time. Not a permanent one. A tour of duty. And what happens at the end of a tour? You get relieved. This whole elaborate, terrifying ordeal wasn't a hunt. It was a handover. A job interview from hell. The passenger wasn't a monster to be killed. He was a force to be managed. Contained. Passed along. The rule, never stop. It wasn't just to keep him dormant. It was the core of the contract. As long as you were driving, as long as you were fulfilling your purpose as the vessel, you were safe. You were in control. The moment you stopped, the moment you failed, the handover process began. You became the cargo, and a new driver was called in. That was Earl's job. He wasn't a hunter. He was a repo man. He was there to collect the failed asset and deliver him to the processing center. This town, Havenwood. The footsteps were closer now, just around the corner of the dumpster. The cold dread was still there, but it was joined by something new. A flicker, not of hope, but of understanding. A sliver of light in the absolute darkness. This thing, this organization, it operated on rules. Twisted, nightmarish rules, but rules nonetheless. It had a structure, a process. And any process can be broken. Any set of rules can be exploited. The weakness wasn't the passenger. The weakness was the system. The contract. The handover. It was all predicated on the failure of the current vessel. On the driver stopping. My eyes snapped open. I looked down at the flare gun lying in the dirt next to my hand. A tool for signaling for help. That's what the voice had said. He was mocking me. But what if he was wrong? What if I wasn't signaling for help from the outside world? What if I was signaling to the only other party in this contract? My terror didn't vanish, but it transformed. It became cold. It became sharp. It became a desperate, razor-thin resolve. I wasn't Frank Carver, the victim, anymore. I was a contractor whose business deal had gone sour, and I was about to renegotiate the terms. I picked up the flare gun, the plastic suddenly feeling heavy and substantial in my hand. The footsteps stopped. He was here, standing just out of sight behind the dumpster. He was waiting for me to acknowledge my defeat. He was waiting for me to surrender. But I wasn't going to surrender. I was going to send a message. The air grew impossibly cold. I could feel the passenger's presence on the other side of the dumpster, a suffocating weight of ancient malice and patient victory. He thought the game was over. He thought he had me, but the game had just changed. The flicker of insight hadn't given me a perfect plan, but it had given me leverage. A single, desperate, all-or-nothing gambit. My new resolve was a fragile shield against the tidal wave of fear, but it was a shield nonetheless. I wasn't prey anymore. I was a party in a hostile takeover, and I was refusing to sign the papers. I pushed myself to my feet, my aching muscles screaming in protest. I held the flare gun tight against my chest, concealed from view. I wasn't going to fire it at him. That was a fool's move. Firing it at him was accepting his terms, playing his game of physical confrontation. I had to reject the game entirely. I had to appeal to a higher authority, the system itself, the Janus Corporation, the unseen partners in this monstrous enterprise. I took a deep, shuddering breath and stepped out from behind the dumpster. He was there, not 10 feet away. The man in the suit. His form was clearer now, less a blur and more a solid thing, as if my acceptance of his reality had given him more substance. He stood with an inhuman stillness, his featureless face cocked to one side, as if in curiosity. The voice slid into my mind, smooth as silk, cold as the grave. "It is time, Frank. Your run is over." "No," I said aloud, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's not. There's been a mistake in the contract." For the first time, I felt a flicker of something from him that wasn't predatory confidence. It was confusion, a momentary hiccup in his absolute control. "There is no mistake. You stopped. You broke the covenant." "I didn't stop," I lied, my heart hammering. "I was walking a razor's edge. My vehicle was disabled. By you. That's a breach of contract on your part. You interfered with the carrier. You compromised the integrity of the vessel and the delivery schedule." I was throwing their own sterile corporate language back at them. I was no longer a terrified trucker. I was a logistics manager filing a grievance. "The terms of my service are clear. I drive. I don't stop. Your actions made my compliance impossible. This handover is null and void." He stood silent. The pressure in the air intensified. I could feel his anger, his frustration. This was not in his script. I was supposed to be a whimpering animal, not a litigator. "You ran." The voice hissed in my head, a venomous counter-argument. "You abandoned the vessel." "I was securing a new one." I shot back, gesturing with my head toward the dead freightliner down the street. "My primary vehicle was compromised by your unsanctioned actions. I was in the process of acquiring a replacement to continue the run. Protocol. Contingency. I'm sure it's in the fine print of the agreement I signed. I was making it all up, weaving a fiction of corporate procedure around a core of supernatural horror. But it felt right. It felt true to the cold, transactional nature of this whole nightmare. I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to force their hand. I needed to create a situation so chaotic, so public, so damaging to their clandestine operation that honoring my insane bluff would be less costly than dealing with the fallout. That was the purpose of the flare. "Now," I said, my voice dropping, taking on a tone of command I didn't know I possessed. "You're going to step aside. You're going to restart my truck. And I'm going to get back on the road and continue my run. Or I will file a formal complaint." I let that hang in the air for a second. Then I reveal my leverage. I brought the flare gun up, but I didn't aim it at him. I aimed it straight up at the sky, at the dark, empty desert sky above this phantom town. "This is my formal complaint," I stated, my voice ringing with false confidence. One flare, fired every 60 seconds. A distress signal, not for the local cops. You've already shown me what you think of them. This is a signal for anyone with a satellite, a high-altitude drone, or a long-range telescope. The kind of people who get very interested in unexplained, repeating phenomena in the middle of a top-secret black site, which is what I'm starting to think this place is. How long do you think your little town of Havenwood stays a secret when there's a beacon firing from its main street every minute? How does that square with your employers, passenger? Does the Janus Corporation appreciate that kind of public exposure? The man in the suit stood absolutely still. The pressure in my mind was immense, a silent battle of wills. He was a god in this little kingdom, but I was threatening to burn the kingdom down. I was betting everything on a single assumption, that for all his power, he was still just an employee, and employees have to answer to their bosses. I held his gaze, my thumb on the trigger, my whole body trembling with the strain of this final, desperate gamble. The silence in the alley stretched into an eternity. It was a silent, brutal negotiation happening in a dimension I could barely perceive. I could feel the passenger's rage warring with his cold, ancient logic. He could destroy me in a heartbeat. He had demonstrated that. But I wasn't the target anymore. The target was his anonymity, the secrecy of the entire Janus operation. He was a scalpel designed for precise, quiet work. I was threatening to be a grenade, tearing a hole in his sterile, hidden world. My thumb rested on the flare gun's trigger, a single point of pressure that held the entire stalemate in balance. My bluff had to be absolute. One flicker of doubt, one moment of hesitation, and he would call it. He would erase me and deal with the consequences. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hand was steady. My face was a mask of cold resolve I didn't feel. Then, the pressure in my head lessened. It didn't vanish, but it receded like a predator taking a single step back. The voice returned, no longer conversational or threatening, but laced with a new, unfamiliar tone. Resentment. The contract will be honored. The words were a concession, a defeat, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. But I didn't let it show. I kept the flare gun aimed at the sky. I kept my eyes locked on his featureless face. This wasn't over until I was back in my cab with the engine running. He turned, not with the fluid grace of before, but with a stiff, almost petulant motion. He walked out of the alley and down the empty main street toward my Peterbilt. I followed, keeping a safe 20 yards between us, the flare gun still held at the ready. He stopped beside the driver's door of my truck. He didn't touch it. He just stood there for a moment, and then the familiar chirp of the locks echoed in the silent town. The doors were unlocked. He turned his head and looked at me one last time. Drive, the voice commanded. It was not a suggestion. It was the reinstatement of the original order. Do not stop. Then, in a way that defied all physics, he simply dissolved. He didn't walk away. He didn't fade. His form just seemed to fray at the edges, unraveling like smoke in a breeze, until nothing was left but the empty street and the buzz of the sodium lamps. At the same moment, the lights of Havenwood began to flicker and die, one by one, plunging the phantom town back into the primordial darkness from which it had been born. I didn't waste a second. I ran to my truck, scrambled up into the cab, and slammed the door. The keys were in the ignition. I turned them. The dashboard lit up, the gauges swept, and the Cummins engine roared to life, its familiar, beautiful rumble filling the cab. It was the sound of my own heartbeat restarting. I slammed the truck into gear, my hands shaking uncontrollably now that the immediate danger was past. I didn't look back. I stomped on the accelerator and peeled out of the dead town, leaving the ghost of Havenwood and the murdered trooper to be swallowed by the desert. I drove for 18 hours straight. I didn't stop for fuel, for food, for anything. I pushed my rig and myself to the absolute limit, running on pure, unadulterated terror. The reefer unit behind me hummed its low, bone-deep lullaby, and I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in 30 years that it would never, ever stop. The delivery location in Oregon, the nondescript warehouse, was real. As I pulled up to the gate, a man in a plain gray uniform stepped out of guard shack, holding a clipboard. He looked at me, and my pale face, my haunted eyes. He didn't seem surprised. He just nodded. "You're late," he said, his voice flat. "I was detained," I managed to say. He looked at the clipboard, made a check mark. "The client has been placated. Your payment has been wired. Your contract is concluded. We will not be requiring your services again." He opened the gate, and I drove my rig inside. Another driver, his face as grim and weary as my own must have been, was waiting to hook up to the white trailer. I unhitched it, got back in my cab, and drove away without a backward glance. I never saw the money. I didn't want it. I didn't want any part of their world. I drove my rig to the first dealership I found, sold it for half of what it was worth, and took a bus home. That was 6 months ago. I haven't driven a truck since. I can't. Sometimes in the dead of night, I still feel that low hum in my bones. I see that featureless face in every shadow. I sold my house. I moved across the country. But I know it's not over. I didn't defeat it. I just renegotiated. The contract is concluded, but I know what the Janus Corporation does. They find drivers, and they're always hiring. I got away, but I'm forever changed. The world is no longer a place of highways and truck stops. It's a thin, fragile crust over a world of ancient things and monstrous bargains. I know the truth now. I know that some cargo is not meant to be delivered. It's meant to be endured. And I know that out there, right now, another driver is on the road, hauling a plain white trailer, listening to a dispatcher's voice telling him the one, single, unbreakable rule. And I just pray he doesn't make the same mistake I did. I pray he never, ever stops.